edition of Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. And, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for coming. Today we have a very interesting and fascinating guest. We have Dooooovid, who is a member of the Orthodox Jewish community, and he comes to us from Novi, Michigan. Is it Dooooovid or Detroit?
Southfield, Michigan.
Oh, Southfield. Okay, yeah. My mom was born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan. So I have Michigan blood, and I grew up just outside of Windsor, Ontario. So we're both in the same region, I guess. But yeah, how is everything there for you, Dooooovid? Things going well?
Yeah, excellent. I appreciate you having me on and reaching out. And this is what I do. I love having conversations of background interfaith for years now. More recently, you might see me kind of like Donahue, Jerry Springer type arguing with counter Semites, but my background is more straight interfaith, and that's what I like doing most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's challenging work, but it's also important work. And we were talking about this offline a little bit. Back, like when we think about interfaith dialogue, it's about coming to someone's place of worship, and each saying their individual prayers and agreeing to certain terms. But a lot of the challenging and important topics normally don't get discussed in those realms. But as we said, with with COVID and everything, and with technology, people who don't have a background in tech can create these streams very easily, and people aren't afraid to discuss the important topics in front of a worldwide audience. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Do you find that that's changed over the years in your experience doing interfaith, Dooooovid?
Yeah, I mean, God works in mysterious ways. So COVID-19 has forced things online, and certain benefits to online. If people follow my YouTube channel, I've been recording, putting up interfaith locally in Metro Detroit for close to 10 years. And the fact that we couldn't get together has made things go online. And then as mentioned before, a lot of interfaiths are they're pleasant. They're mostly pleasantries where just you bring together a bunch of different clergy or representatives of traditions, and we say a little thing about our tradition, or sing a song, say a prayer, and just take turns, and then eat a little food, and so builds community, and it's nice. But rarely do we have kind of like the important conversations or getting to deep theological discussions about the differences, similarities, or maybe political implications of our beliefs that might be more applicable, better online. And also, like reaching a global audience. Like I think you said you heard me from Claire Call, like in London, and on Right Reaction, Ralph in Germany. I do a regular show Thursdays with Charles Moskowitz in Boston, and another stream partner Sunday, Week in View in Canada and New Zealand. So, believe in one God that creates the whole world, the creator of everyone. So, interfaith, you could bring around traditions locally, but the power of the internet to really connect globally, and even you have a chat, people could enter the conversation instantly. We're live streaming, so anybody from anywhere in the world could pop right in and join the conversation.
Yeah, it definitely is an interesting time, and now more than ever, I mean, these conversations need to occur. With not just with COVID riling everybody up, having to like sit down in their house for months on end. Plus, having also, with cancel culture, even bringing up, a lot of these controversial, issues that we may even just, touch upon lightly, and offer our input, can have enormous negative repercussions. But having said that, I mean, we were talking. I mean, there's so many different tangents we can go off into.
You want me to give a quick bio?
Yeah, you can give a quick bio. Go ahead, Dooooovid. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I grew up in Metro Detroit. I half Jew. My father's American, mostly Scottish, a little Irish, a little bit of um, Cherokee blood, but rather like secular Christian. We never went to church. My mother is a Reform Jew, part German Jewish, and didn't really raise me in the religion. I chose to be bar mitzvahed, and after high school, I went to Israel. I was very interested in my Judaism, and ended up enrolling and studying in ultra Orthodox Hasidic yeshivas, and became like a full born again ultra Orthodox Jew once I got to Israel and saw what Judaism meant. And I studied in Mir Yeshiva, one of the biggest Orthodox yeshivas in Jerusalem. And then after a few years, I went back to Brooklyn, and I wanted to be more involved in Judaism. So New York was the place to be, and I studied under a lot of famous Hasidic rabbis, and did various things for the community. And at some point, I eventually went back, and I finished my degree in university. I'm by trade a civil engineer. I do property management. I actually sell books on eBay also. But I got involved in Interfaith, and actually in New York, my first place of Interfaith was with Muslims. I was in Stony Brook, and I had a friend who was a descendant of the Prophet, and like I'd studied, I'd read the Torah, and he was a Sayyid from Pakistan. He told me his lineage was from the Prophet, and he became part of an organization, Children of Abraham, that was actually funded by a very wealthy man in Dubai. And so I started doing interfaith with him, and speaking to representatives of our neighbor Arab, Pakistani Muslim communities in Brooklyn Borough Park. And I did that for a few years. And I'm pretty scholarly. I have multiple copies of the Quran. I have 4 different English translations, a big library. I've read quite a bit of the Hadith and literature. And eventually I came back to Metro Detroit and figured, I learned a lot, and I wanted to spread and support Judaism in Metro Detroit. And although, I had Orthodox leanings in some ways, because I'm only a half Jew, or wasn't born in the community, I tried doing outreach, and I basically worked together with anybody. I still do, anybody promoting Judaism across the board. I actually found a female rabbi in Detroit that had an interfaith network, and decided to back her. It's called Rabbi Dorite Dut. Her organization is called Dion, Detroit Interfaith Organization Network. And she had a pretty good network. Every month we went to a different place of worship, and quite a few Muslims. We had Imam Kazimi of the I think biggest mosque in America, Islamic Center of America, and later, and also lots, mostly Christian organizations. And I did that for a few years. People follow my YouTube. I used to put on my cell phone, my iPhone, record and put those up on my YouTube. And more recently, I was in University of Michigan, and like Richard Spencer, when Donald Trump got elected to office, Richard Spencer was trying to come to University of Michigan. It was really a big deal. Like there was walkouts and protests and court cases, and I was kind of curious, like who is this guy? Like honestly, I was Metro Detroit. I've never been in a majority white area. I live in a majority African American neighborhood. So it's like white nationalists, neo-Nazis. These guys still exist, and so I found this guy Luke Ford, a convert to Orthodox Judaism in Los Angeles, who was interviewing a bunch of these big alt-right figures. And I got in the chat. I wanted to represent Judaism, and I became friendly with Luke Ford. And he he's in Hollywood. He's been streaming. God forbid, even was a pornography reporter. And he bought me a microphone and set me up to debate a lot of these big personalities. So for the last few years, I've been kind of defending Judaism against some of our larger critics online. And I'm also a free speech advocate. And so I found some enjoyment, because the interfaith faiths, I enjoyed doing it, meeting people, creating community, learning about different traditions. But they're almost too friendly. Like there's almost never any conflict or any of the issues that might cause conflict brought up, and that's really what people basically want to hear about. So I got involved in streaming and online debates, you know, called like blood sports, kind of like it's like Jerry Springer or Donahue, where people are just throwing
Mhm.
chairs at each other uh, instantly. So I've been doing that for a few years, and I guess that's probably where you came across me. But as I said, my base is more scholarship. And last thing I'll mention is from doing interfaiths and all these arguments. I also, so I'm an engineer. I tried to get a degree in physics. I love mathematics in the bathroom or my spare time. I'm always reading books on math and physics. I've came up with this idea called the multiple truth hypothesis, which is basically trying to understand how all these conflicting ways of viewing the world, or even theology of cosmology, eschatology, what's the origin of the world, or where we headed to, could be true at the same time, even though possibly they're mutually exclusive. And so I came up with this concept, the multiple truth hypothesis, similar to maybe like the multiverse or physics ideas of like the Schrodinger's equation, that maybe multiple conflicting things are in fact mutually true. So like a religious point of view, that can it be that Moses came to the Jewish people, and Jesus and Muhammad and Hinduism, or Native American, all these various traditions that appear to be mutually exclusive, especially when we consider the cosmologies of how we believe that the world was created, or what's going to happen at the end of days. So to solve this in my head and to be able to be respectful to people listening to their ideas, I came up with this concept that maybe these mutual exclusive things are in fact all true, and some sort of a framework to look at that based on computer programming called truth discovery, and recent ideas in physics. So I appreciate you reaching out, and look forward to talking about a whole variety of subjects. And maybe me and you are similar. If you're a convert, or I'm a half Jew and studied in Orthodox yeshivas, and that I do a lot of explaining to non-Jews about Judaism, because a lot of times, like our religious comrades live somewhat segregated and largely just deal with each other, or aren't necessarily comfortable always explaining our beliefs or culture to other people. So a lot of times it falls on converts or mixed-blooded people to be the representative to the outside world. So appreciate you reaching out.
No, I think we'll have definitely some interesting conversations. I think our origin stories kind of intersected in different ways, even though we come from different communities. That's interesting that when you talked about your multiple truth hypothesis, um, would that be similar in a way to perennialism and traditionalism, as founded by Rene Guénon? Is because it seems similar in that they had the idea of different multiple truths in different religions. Um,
Freemasonic more,
okay.
that say like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, that all great teachers, where like generally most traditions are exclusive and saying this is the truth, and from a logical point of view, if the world was created 5,788 years ago, it can't be billions of years old. Or if at the end of the day, these different messiahs or things are expected to happen. Um, but yeah, it could be considered like perennialism, but I try to classify it more within Freemasonry. And I'm not an initiated Freemasonry general. I'm against oaths or taking initiation of that sort. But I noticed that a lot of the greatest minds of history were Freemasons, and the founding of America, that somewhat had this this picture that these great bearers who were fathers of these traditions were all men of God, even though they had conflicting point of views or ideas.
Okay. Um, yeah, it seems that when we take a look at people, in this current day and age, we have so many different conflicting views of the world. That is just stirring up so much animosity between people, being cooped up in their own homes, for the last 18 months. A lot of them just stay in their own realms and don't really venture outward. And if they do, it's just, to find, what talking points they like to attack. And then it just it just really creates a lot of, in my mind, a lot of depression among these people who get into these, echo chambers within the internet.
It's
Um,
more Hindu influence, actually. Saying that I from Interfaith, I got involved with the Hare Krishna movement, and I read a lot of their literature. So it's probably um, comparable with things like Vivekananda, unity and diversity. That even like Guinan or these Western figures, or even Freemasonry, that it's more in line with the pantheism, I guess, from a certain uh, school. But I think the uniqueness of the multiple truth hypothesis is actually epistemological framework for saying that truth is very difficult to know what the real truth is, and that from our perspective, that it could be that multiple conflicting things are in fact true at the same time. So I think I'm saying more than perennialism, because I'm using some of the modern theories of artificial intelligence and computer programming and physics to say more than maybe the people in the past have said. Like I said, the Schrodinger's wave equation, or the cat is the cat is simultaneously dead and alive at the same time, so that to try to have some similar perspective towards religion. Can it be that Jesus is Messiah, a false prophet, uh, just a prophet, or just a man, or Muhammad, or all these things, to say that yes, it's possible that multiple conflicting things can be true simultaneously, which is largely goes against common sense. To that historically, probably people would have rejected something as being nonsensical until modern physics or computer paradigms made it possible to believe in such a thing.
Yeah, that it's kind of the and I guess, the traditional, because me, as an Orthodox Muslim, I mean, in the same vein, in Christianity, and in many, within, I'm sure, within Judaism, that they believe that their religion is the truth. Like, it's, we believe in salvific exclusivity. And we want, as part of a, because we want to share the message with everybody. Islam and Christianity are both evangelical religions. So I guess that would kind of run counter to the multiple truth hypothesis, but still, you still have to live and get along with people in this world. And is it, I mean, it,
It's
you
just an
know
idea in my head, but I mean,
mhm,
if you've if you into physics, or like the multiverse or multiple worlds type ideas, to say no, and it's possible that your exclusivity could be true, and then in a corresponding parallel world, the other thing is true at the same time, or something like that. That
mm,
try to have some sort of grounding with modern concepts. If you know, like Tegmark, or the various ideas of the multiverse or multiple worlds hypothesis that they use to explain uh, discrepancies in quantum theory or physics.
okay. Well,
So
that's yeah. I mean, that's not to say that we can, predict, the outcome of people in the world, where they're going to end up, when they die. I mean, even the, the people of the book, or those who are, didn't have any religion at all. They, as let's take a look at the West. In the 19th and 20th century, there is, the big, I guess, dispute, or argumentation, between, monotheism and Trinitarianism. Those were debates that were had, but again, there's no way that, no, not everyone is going to be this deep scholar that's going to know, be able to research, these religious topics very deeply. And a lot of them are just, living their own lives, and they, each community, that, they have their own, religious values and their own culture. And that's what they, that's been a springboard to help them, get through their, live a righteous life, and work in their group interests.
I
Um,
quote Isaac Newton says, the definition of intelligence hold multiple conflicting ideas in our head at the same time. And really, I can't, you're just from trying to be respectful or understand, be scholarly, trying to understand things at their own level. So if I'm, studying Islam or Hinduism or any tradition, then saying, oh, this is where I agree, this is where we disagree, to
mhm,
say, I want to understand it as a whole theology, worldview, and then at the same time trying to understand different theologies and worldviews, even though
mhm,
they're conflicting, and then to not judge them, because generally my goal in interfaith isn't to judge which traditions are right or wrong, or have a list that you're right on this and wrong on that, to
mhm,
say that they're whole worldviews that disagree and agree on many different points. But it's not my job to try to fix or come to some sort of understanding of these discrepancies, but to just accurately portray them as they are, and then to say,
mhm,
is it possible that just because there's conflicting things that logically would appear there could only be one answer, that necessarily means there could only be one answer. And I said the modern direction in mathematics and physics that points to that there doesn't have to be just one answer. So just keeping these things in my head as is, um, uh, as conflicting systems, instead of trying to resolve it, for me has proven more useful than trying to resolve and have these long checklists of saying, like, I agree on this and disagree on this, and so
mhm,
on and so on.
mhm. No, I mean that's definitely a good way of looking at it, and of course, it's important to to know these traditions and know where people are coming from. I mean, we're living in a globalized world now, so it's really paramount. I mean, you know, um, you know, uh, centuries ago, people were mostly living with a few exceptions in monocultural societies. And there wasn't really much exposure to to other communities and other cultures, apart from what you could read in a book. Um, but I want to spin off a little bit, going off a little bit of a tangent. You had a discussion with some, you mentioned Spencer. You had a discussion with Jean-Francois Garepi concerning monoculturalism versus multiculturalism. And you were arguing the point that it's better to live in a multicultural society because it's important to there's like this idea of the universal concept of of brotherhood and man, and that
Universal brotherhood of man,
universal brotherhood of man. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
which I'm not sure if I took that from theosophy or what, but I like the expression. So then I was using the expression, the universal brotherhood of man, which is probably biblical or Islamist, but I think it actually comes from theosophy that used that term.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was offering the con of that, and that is inevitably going to lead to conflict if people have such different ways of life and ways of doing and different group strategies. So it was an interesting discussion. But given the present world that we're living in, I mean, this is there's it's just it's going to become more multicultural, and there's just nothing that can be done about it at this point. I mean, but given that, I mean, what we're about at Islam for Europeans is that you know the idea of of a universal faith, whether that's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, that is something that binds like a group and a community together. But at the same time, like we come from different communities and different cultures, and the ways of doing, the culture, the dress, the cuisine, all of that can vary, very differently. And I think what the Muslim community is kind of struggling with now is that due to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, when they came to the West en masse, this idea that we all had to be united, but that you know, as that has, there's been a lot of growing pains that have come with that. in that you have all these different groups and different worldviews and thoughts and languages, and just opinions on how what's the best way forward for the Muslim community. And that, oh, did you have to go, Dooovid, or oh, you back?
Sorry, it's my
He's
phone
Oh,
was
no
ringing
problem.
there.
No problem. I know this is coming to a point. I know it's a lot. I know I'm a fast talker here, but that has come with a lot of growing pains in terms that people are the Muslim community seem to be for the most part unified on religion, but there's still a lot of differences in terms of the cultural variation. And the approach we're taking is that these culture should be maintained because tradition is very important to people, and it brings them back to a tradition in which it's getting away from Western globalization, which is just basically atomizing everybody. So in that way, you can still be united, but at the same time, I think these, you've lived in the metro area for a long time. You'll probably notice that a lot of these, different cultural groups that belong to the Muslim community have sort of branched off and formed their own centers and organizations and mosques, and they don't bar anyone from coming in, but it's still, an identifiable culture that's with them. Um, so I don't know how, the Jewish community, if they've, done the similar way, or if it's just more of like a homogenized culture. But what we're in favor for is that, for us, for those who have converted to Islam, we should be keeping everything in our culture. But in order to do that, you need to collectivize, and form your own organizations, form a cohesive unit in which you're still, you have your own marriage networks, your own restaurants, your own orgs, but still remain part of the greater Muslim community. So I just wanted to get your take on that, because really, if this, I think there's a lot of um, fear and resentment that you're seeing in the Anglosphere right now, is that they feel that their culture is dying out. But with what we're proposing is that, for us who have converted to Islam, if we were to form our own, cohesive unit, just as every other community has done, that this would actually be a positive thing. It would increase the European birth rate. It would dissipate a lot of the fear around Islam. So you kind of like killing two birds with one stone. And I feel that if the Jewish community, if they can embrace this idea, not only would it reduce Islamophobia or anger towards Muslims, but also anti-Semitism. So I just wanted to get your take on that. I know it's a lot to digest, but what do you think? What are your like kind of first thoughts? Did you have anything you want to spin off on
Yeah, I
with
would say generally,
that pitch?
immigration and multiculturalism are from the most important issues to Jews in America. Although possibly in Israel, the opposite, where and even Islamic, to say that. And when I debated John Francis Greppi, I argued more general utilitarian ideas that even atheists just say the benefits of multiculturalism, economic, socially, educationally, through more scientific studies. As a PhD in biology, and as a famous atheist nihilist, they're saying even atheist nihilists, there's plenty of reasons uh, of the benefits of multiculturalism. I would even put it that you could have Islamic takes that are anti-immigration, because obviously there's Islamic nations that basically follow Sharia law, that are anti-immigrant, that are basically ethno states, where that it's very difficult for people who aren't part of the ethnicity to become part of the nation, even though they follow Sharia law. And maybe like Saudi Arabia, or even Iran, or even Malaysia. There could be where they have somewhat of an ethno nationalist government, even though they follow Sharia law. And even in Israel, that is generally an ethnocentric, ethno nationalist country. So even in America, most Jews, polling wise, pro immigration sentiment is one of the single largest rallying issues of Jews across America. In Israel, it's the opposite. And most Israelis oppose immigration and actively want to keep the ethnic character of the nation. I think one of the first counter Semites. There's a man, Kevin McDonald, who wrote these books, Judaism as a Group Evolutionary Strategy, and I'd barely heard of evolutionary psychology, and honestly, I'm not a believer in evolution, but the concept of people acting in groups made sense to me. And that hopefully we'll talk a little bit about Edward Dutton, who wrote with Richard Spencer this book
Mhm.
about Islam as a group evolutionary strategy. So there's different takes on it. As I said, you could be a Muslim and possibly support ethno-nationalism, possibly be against immigration, although could be in the U.S. And there's conflicting uh, group interest, and then sometimes group interests conflict religious interests. So people could group on many different factors. So the most natural way for people to group is probably ethnicity and race, just blood, similar DNA, people who look the same, speak the same language, have the same customs, as opposed to religion, which is more an idea, but also a way of life. And then even within religion, that there could be more important groupings, such as like capitalism or socialism, that if you were a Muslim, you might prefer to live with non-Muslims who are capitalistic if you're capitalistic, or socialistic if you're socialistic. But the concerns, like what are the concerns facing Muslims in America? And say as a European blooded convert to Islam, the concerns would be substantially different. So generally, say that most Muslims in America have darker features, and so things like white-black dynamics are a huge factor that face Muslims, and also immigration, that most Muslims in America almost exclusively came from other countries. There's very few converts to Islam. And so immigration and fighting, so to say, discrimination uh, may have very little to do with Islam, so to say, or even Judaism, so to say, but that's the issues that are important to the people who follow the religion. So saying that the Jewish religion isn't fighting discrimination and supporting immigration, but just the issues that are important to the people. And generally, Judaism's a religion to live by, not to die by, and Judaism wants people to thrive and have good families and build up uh, lives, and even be economically successful. Somewhat of a merchant religion, probably similar to Islam. Most Muslims, probably it goes in line with their religion to be successful, to be well liked, to build up a family, to be economically successful. And it's not necessarily like the purpose of Islam is to promote immigration or to fight discrimination against whites, but there is a factor of overall group strategy. And if there's a severe anti-immigrant sentiment or discrimination against darker skinned people, and it turns out that greater than 90% of Muslims are darker skinned people, or greater than 90% of Muslims are immigrants, that it causes those issues to be at the forefront of the concerns of the followers. And it's in that in the Middle East, it could be the opposite, that immigration, if you're in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Malaysia, or a stable Muslim government, that they might actually oppose immigration, that they don't want people coming. They want to maintain the ethnic hegemony of the nation, because there aren't really issues that concern that the best interest of the majority of the people who follow the religion in that area. And then so you, as a Westerner, that you may be a convert and a follower of Islam, but if you're European, you're not facing anti black or immigrant sentiment, even
Well,
though.
I'm going to stop right there, Dooovid. I would actually argue that that our interests are actually totally in line with the Muslim community, and I'll give a few points as to why that is, or the why I believe that is. One of the main arguments that comes from the kind
Well,
of
I
the
mean
most religious.
specifically that multiculturalism and immigration, that I don't think the heart, that it's not like it. to Jews and Muslims in America, it could be the single most important issue facing us. But I'm not so sure that that's, so to say, a central pillar of the religion. And I was giving an example of
Right.
Israel or Islamic nations in the Middle East that generally oppose multiculturalism and immigration.
Right. So, and the refugee crisis, it's being, I believe it's being weaponized by both the left and the right. On the left side, the leftist political parties. I mean, if they really cared about Islam and the refugees that are coming into the West. Just from a purely economic perspective, to to put one refugee up in a hotel in London, you could literally support hundreds or thousands of refugees that are living in refugee camps in Turkey and in Jordan. It's not an economically feasible model. A lot of them die en route, via the Mediterranean or whatever. And so it's a very delicate situation. And the reason why, what sparked this whole refugee crisis was, neoconservative intervention in these countries. So, or the destabilization of these countries. So either whether that's through direct military action, through the support of puppet governments. I know you didn't believe in those things. I don't think you were pro neoconservative war against like the war in Iraq, Dovid. I mean, was that something like when it was in 2003? Like, were you against it or were you
Yeah, I mean,
neutral on
I
it?
did speak out against the war. I thought it was a
Of
bad
course,
idea.
yeah.
Um, at the time. Although say I'm pro multiculturalism generally because I think it benefits you. Like I have a more globalist attitude, but saying as someone who advocates for the Jewish community or has done interfaith, I know that these are issues that constituents care deeply about. So if you're and not just most Muslims in Metro Detroit are not refugees; they came by choice
Mhm.
to America, and saying that obviously you want to be welcome, and there's a sentiment to say it's good to be part of the majority, and if you're part of the majority, that there's probably a tendency to want to maintain being in the majority, and if you're part of a minority, and that's why I keep on mentioning that there's a lot of Muslim nations in the Middle East that are extremely hard to migrate to.
Well, and we keep hearing about, the majority and the minority. I mean, one of the major arguments, um, and it's a valid argument that we hear about Islamophobia, or anger toward, anti-Islam sentiment is that they say that, the reason why there's so much is because, Muslims are mostly overwhelmingly people of color. And I, debated this topic with Umar Lee, and it's really begging the question because if that's one of the main issues, I mean, then the solution to that would be, what if there were more white Muslims? I mean, to bring that percentage down and have an actual segment, of the Muslim population that's of European descent.
Well, I asked you
Um,
just to make it clear. So to say, let's say that hypothetically that they closed immigration and said no one's getting in, period. And then you're still
you're
advocating for
still
Islam and for people to become Islamic in Western countries, not because you're going to try to bring over people from the Middle East, but because you think that European people would have productive lives and be benefit from being Islamic, and it's completely on tied to immigration, maybe like Bosnia or something like that. As an example, that you have stable Islamic population in a European country, and it's not because you're trying to bring over a bunch of darker skinned people. You think because it's a system of life that works for people of any background, versus the contention as a group strategy that you could use the religion as a method to group like ISIS or the Nation of Islam, like here in Metro Detroit, the famous movie Elijah Muhammad, that Islam is the religion that best addresses the concern of Black people, in that perspective that you could look at it and say, yeah, I could see that if you're a Black man in Detroit and you're looking at the religions, that you would see that Islam is the religion that best addresses the concerns that they face. But would you say that of a white person in a non-multicultural area that doesn't plan on having an influx of immigrants, that Islam is still the best religion to address the concerns facing them.
Well, I mean, putting the issue of immigration completely aside, let's just say all things being equal, um, you know, um, Islam is a tradition that I believe has enormous benefits, for any community, really, not just for the African American community, not just for Europeans, but like you said, people from any background.
We just
So
to mention George Bush, that like the who talked about the war in terms of the Crusades and looking at it generally as Christian European versus Middle Eastern, and then clearly a lighter skinned versus darker skinned, where you have lighter skinned Christians fighting darker skinned uh, Muslims. That there is that general framing, and even like Edward Dutton is Islam as a group strategy, that Islam is a method that people from certain geographic areas or ethnic backgrounds use as a group strategy, and that historically, that from a certain crusading type attitude, that was the group strategy that they used in order to wage war against Europe.
I think that we're well aware that there's a lot of anti negative attitudes towards Islam in the Anglosphere. It's absolutely apparent. I mean,
When I'm saying
you know,
negative, that but I'm saying historically that there were
historically
wars,
too. Yeah.
and that armies of millions of people rose up against each other, and the armies that rose up against Europe were largely organized uh, by Muslims, and whether that was the true spirit in say, okay, that Islam could be a good religion for Europeans, but to say that historically Islam has been somewhat of a group strategy of the people who waged war against Europeans.
I think the way in which Muslims tried to bring Islam into Europe, if we contrast it with, say, for example, Southeast Asia, is just it's just hasn't been working. It's been they've been trying to do for 1,300 years. There's been a backlash to that. I'm not saying that to lay the blame on Muslims historically or contemporarily. When we look at how Islam spread in, say, for example, Southeast Asia, it was simple traders, by maybe the dozens or the hundreds, not that many. And the people of those regions in Malaysia and Indonesia, they saw the excellent character of these people. And they, they brought their religion with them, and then of their own volition, they adapted it and they applied it to their own culture. And we see that with China, with Muslim areas in China as well. And this is not, a new idea that we're coming up with. This is actually codified, in Islamic texts. The concept of in Islam, it's called urf, which can be translated as culture, in which that anything that's a good practice should be kept by the people. Right. So now that, we have, uh, mass immigration in the West, it's a fact of life, it's not going away. You know,
Until COVID-19. The fact is that COVID-19, the last year and a half,
it's
immigration
been rolled
has
back.
largely came to a standstill.
Yeah, it has been rolled back to a large extent, but still, the fact still remains that that there's sizable Muslim populations in both North America and in Europe proper. So I mean that's the situation that they're dealing with. So it's now this whole conflict is now that's been going on for 1,300 years between Islam and Europe is now pretty much front and center. But what we're arguing is that if the Muslim community takes the approach that they're presenting Islam to the people of Europe. And again, people from Europeans, hundreds of Europeans convert to thousands of Europeans convert to Islam every day. I mean, it's not as people aren't accepting it. It's just that there is no system in place for Europeans to go into a Muslim community unless you have three options basically. One is to marry into a Muslim family, marrying a born Muslim. And a lot of these marriages, some of them do work, but for the most part, there's a lot of intercultural difficulties and conflicts that occur with that. Second is if you go all in and you become an Islamic scholar, or you really go deeply into a Muslim organization to become like a da'i or a scholar, or you make hijrah, you go to Egypt or Saudi Arabia and you learn as much as you possibly can. So it's almost like the community and family that you lost, when you converted, you're doing that, because you want to pursue Islamic knowledge, but also it's like supplanting that social loss that you experienced. So that's option two. And then option three is, becoming like I guess like a liberal Muslim type activist, on university campuses. Yeah. So for European descendant converts, it's basically one of those three options, or some combination of those three. But that is such a thin slice of people. The average Joe, who might be interested in Islam, really has no choice but to assimilate into a completely different culture. So what we're saying is that for the Muslim community, because there's mosques all over Europe and North America, help the converts of European descent form their own collectives and form a cohesive unit. And in that way, you foster this cohesive cultural, identity from whatever European country you're from. And that's how you basically change them. Because right now, the strategy that I find that Muslims are using is just don't talk to the other side. Form all these alliances with different minority groups, who, let's just put it mildly, have less than favorable attitudes towards white people. And this is doing nothing but exacerbating the problem. I mean, it's just creating more and more Islamophobia. And I think you would agree with me, Dovid, because we were talking offline, is that when you look, what you're trying to do is great work with the Jewish community, and that you're trying to represent Judaism, and you're putting yourself in a bubble. You're getting out of the echo chamber. Um, and I guess the reactions from the Jewish community have been pretty varied. But wouldn't you say that this would be a more effective strategy than with what Muslims have right now, which is to have this kind of monocultural, um, presenting Islam as kind of like this monoculture, whereas like to get rid of one's cultural identity altogether. Um,
Well, it's very interesting. I like the concept of group strategy, although I'm more believe in the soul and what the origins of group strategy, and as opposed to Jews who are to some extent a European people, as the population, like 700 years ago, I think there was less than 1 million Jews, and the population of Jews bloomed to almost 20 million people, largely in Eastern Europe, and
mhm,
that most Ashkenazic Jews, genetically are 40 to 60% European blood. And in the United States, 85% of Jews are Ashkenazic, and even in Israel, 50% of Jews are Ashkenazic. That modern day Judaism, as the whole global, is ethnically tiered towards being a European people. Although there's obviously Jews across the world, and Iran and Middle Eastern Jews, that there's the sheer number of Ashkenazic Jews is much higher in proportion than any other uh, group of Jews, as opposed to Islam. If you looked at the global Islam, I think Europeans, and I've had this discussion before and seen the numbers, that Europeans make up less than 3%. Saying like statistically, 20% of Jews in America have blue eyes. So
mhm,
relatively Jews are quite white, and even on like an ethnographic scale, Jews are almost as white as basically just as white as many European peoples. Not like Northern European or Nordic people, but compared to Italians or Spanish or different Europeans, the Jews are basically just as white as your average European, at least the Ashkenazic Jews that dominate uh, American demographics, as opposed to Muslims, where uh, probably less than 3%, maybe even less than that, of the global Islamic community is European. If you look like Bosnia, where you have, I'm not sure how many million, maybe Dagestan or certain areas, there might be tens of millions of European blooded Muslims. And if you look at the number of converts to Islam, um, it's still might be less than 1 million total, like of European people that have converted. Not like talking about Bosnia or the parts of Russia where you have a long-standing Islamic communities, but even if you went to a mosque in any place in Europe, that the vast majority of them are going to be Middle Eastern people or people of different ethnicities, and if you want to put that in darker skinned people. And so it's the interesting factor of the group strategy. So you have a universal message of the religion, and it could be Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and like Hinduism's even more than Muslim. Like obviously, probably like 98% of Hindus are Indian. Um, so when you look at it, the purpose of the religion is to benefit the people, and then you look at the majority of the people, and you have a group strategy based on the people that it represents versus what is the actual message of the religion. And then you have an internal conflict between the internal message of the religion and the demographics of the people who follow the religion, and the necessity of the religion to represent those people. And then you have greater group conflict with other groups that aren't part of the religion. So to say that obviously there's European Muslims and there's converts to Islam, but to a certain extent, maybe demographically, the majority of the people who are ethnically Islam, that were brought up in it, that ancestors have been following the religion for generations, have historical group conflict with other groups. So, I mean, I think they're important dynamics, and I think it's the importance of these conversations. So to say, like in the West, I was saying a lot of these interfaith networks I have on my own YouTube channel, like they become fighting hate or promoting immigration, or even trying to convince people to vote for Democratic candidates, like like God forbid, like Hillary Clinton back over Donald Trump. Saying that you're part of a minority, and if Donald Trump wins, it's not going to be good for you because he represents the majority and he doesn't want people who are different around. And so that's a typical, could be demagoguery, and so it's interesting. I say, my grandfather's grandfather was a rabbi in Chicago, and he was at the 1893 Parliament of World Religions with Vivekananda, Rabbi Bamberger from Germany in the Workmen's Circle. And I think there were two Muslims represented. One of the Muslims was an academic convert who had never been to the Middle East, had never met a Muslim, and converted to Islam purely off of reading the Quran and translations of texts that were available to him. And he represented Islam at the famous 1893 World Parliament of Religion. And then there was one other man that came from the Middle East. And so there's these interesting contentions of group strategy in group conflict. And then it said the necessity of the religion to represent the people that follow it, even though that might come to conflict with the central universal message of the religion.
Well, I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, we're it's you look at the playing field, and you're right. I'm only 3% of the world's Muslim population is of European descent. But I look at it, and I have my background in social psychology. I have a master's degree in applied social psychology, and we learned in business psychology the ASA model. It's which stands for attraction, selection, and attrition. So, I mean, I think currently right now what you're seeing is that, people who are attracted to Islam right now and to actually join a Muslim community, would be less from a particular European demographic, because at this point, it's getting less and less appealing to Westerners, just because of the current political, playing field that we're dealing with. Also, it's a
I'm not even
selection.
making a judgmental, because I was saying it's
Yeah,
it's it's an obligation of religious leaders to represent their flock,
I see.
and if their flock demographically has certain interests
Mhm.
that are in conflict, so to say, maybe with white interests, that if your interest as a white person might be to just maintain being a majority and to keep the way things are, to keep things the way they are, and to generally that most polling shows that people are against immigration overall, that people are skeptical of new people coming, And I mean, so it's an internal natural conflict, and so it doesn't necessarily make anyone good or bad. And
Yeah.
even if you think the religion is true, saying there was factually a prophet with a universal message to all of humanity, but at the same time, the teachings require you to look after the best interests of the people that are currently following the message. And then what do you do if the fact of the best interest of the people currently following the message makes the message less appealing to other peoples?
Hmm. Right. Okay. Let's spin off and go on a different tangent, Duvid. You know, what I've been seeing, kind of, as an outsider looking in, for the what's happened to the Jewish community in the last, probably like 7 years or so. Part of it, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the election of Donald Trump. Is that you're seeing? Is that, from what I can see, it's like a big kind of like ideological rift between, the traditional conservative, reform, kind of like pro-Israel Jews, and the younger crowd, the more liberal Jews, who have sort of allied themselves more with the Muslim community, and sort of uh, got off the Republican boat. Is that, is that because they, I remember reading that it's like a chasm now. I remember reading a newspaper, one, member of the Jewish community was saying that it's just a complete divide right now, between, liberals and traditionalists, and that gap is ever widening. Would you say, that that's kind of like the rift that's gotten wider recently? Because I know you said that you're an anti-Zionist, but did you want to elaborate on that, or?
I'm sure anti-Zionist, but I'm not Zionist, so I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily anti-Zionist. And I studied in non-Zionist schools
Okay.
in Israel, which means that um, I don't think my religion necessitates uh, there being a Jewish state. So that
So
my
it's more
Jewish
like Naturi Karta's position, or?
Well, I'm familiar with Notori Karta. I mean, they're big in Jerusalem. In fact, the majority of Haredi Jews in Jerusalem are, in fact, anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
But it's saying I'm not, like opposed to the Jewish state. I'm just saying I'm like to call myself an anti-Zionist, like Notori Karta, to saying I'm a non-Zionist. That my Judaism in my belief in Judaism doesn't necessitate a Jewish state. In fact, I don't necessarily think that the Jewish state is even beneficial for the Jewish people. But I'm saying, like Notori Karta, that they are actively involved in opposing Zionism. I'm not involved in opposing Zionism. I'm
Mhm.
just not Zionistic in my beliefs, and that's largely, ironically, I learned that in Jerusalem from Torrey Karta leaning rabbis who don't accept the authority of the state of Israel, and part of it is related. I think that that could live under Islamic rule, and say we don't like things like mandatory military service. To say the IDF doesn't keep us safe, I would feel safer under Islamic rule. And a lot of the school, not necessarily the Notori Karta, comes
Mhm.
from Europe, but there was a substantial community in Jerusalem that got along and coexisted under, I guess it still would have been the Ottoman Empire, and say things got worse under the British, and then Zionism, and then a view like, what do I actually need as a Jew, and does the Jewish state, say that currently the coalition politics, that it's easier to be an Orthodox Jew in America than in Israel. There's many things in Israel, God forbid, the most being a mandatory military service, but less ability to practice the religion freely, even being in Holy Land, Israel. And then also the conflict, or what does it mean? Like I'm a priest to nations. We're not supposed to be a nation like other nations. So Zionism is intrinsically in direct conflict with the religious belief, or straight up Notori Karta, like thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal.
Mhm.
And I don't want to have the benefit of like, God forbid, the murder and theft of my fellow Jews. It's okay, if God forbid they conducted a war and took the land of Arabs, whatever the justification or morality of it. But I don't want to have benefit from that, because you can't have benefit from murder and thiefdom. So, uh, but
Yeah.
but generally the Orthodox community in America is the most Zionistic. So the support of Trump came probably from a stronger white identity. Like I mentioned, the Ashkenazic Jewish community is Orthodox community is very, very not diverse. Saying that mostly maintaining Ashkenazic bloodlines, very, very little intermarriage, even intermarriage between Jews and Mizrahi in Israel. Intermarriage rate between Jews and Mizrahi is relatively high, but among Orthodox Jews in America, intermarriage rate even with other Jews is quite low. Actually, in Israel, the intermarriage rate between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Orthodox Jews isn't that high, but might be like 20%. But in America, it's probably like 5%.
Oh, wow.
And so you have the white identity factor that like it may be an opportunism, but we're going to side, so to say, with the whites, and then also the strong basic support for Israel, that Trump, is basically going to support Israel um, in, if you want to call human rights abuses or even war crimes. But, basically Trump was going to turn a blind eye towards whatever Israel did. I mean, Israel probably could have, I mean, even Trump himself says that he encouraged Israel to do a lot more than it actually did. Israel probably could have expelled the Palestinians had it wanted to, and Trump wouldn't have done anything. In fact, so it was rather miraculous that under Trump that Israel didn't expel the Palestinians, or wasn't worse actions than they did. But the basic dissonance is even from a liberal perspective, is two states for two people is basic racism. Like I live in Metro Detroit, and that's segregation. Like I went to public school. I have black friends, black neighbors. The idea that I can't live integrated with blacks is just like no one would espouse that. And then the concept two states for two people, largely based on the idea because it's impossible for us to get along, is untenable to most younger American Jews. So you have the multicultural issue. So Orthodox Jews in America generally live segregated, um, go to separate schools, private schools, and live in somewhat insular communities, or they might do business with the wider community. But generally live in sectioned off areas where most of the people that they deal with are our own, and maybe it's only the adult males that go out and do business with the wider world, or people who seek education. But if you're an Orthodox Jew in modern day major city America, you could basically only deal with the fellow Orthodox Jews unless you have to go out into the business world, or representatives. And even me as a half Jew, was kind of chosen to be a representative of the rural, to the outside world, to some extent, so they didn't have to do it. That saying that I was chosen to speak to non-Jews on behalf of the community, so that they didn't have to
A
do it.
very similar path to Dooooovid. Go ahead. Yeah.
And so even support that to say, but so you're coming at a group strategy conflict between American Jews, American Orthodox Jews, and Israeli Jews. So American Orthodox Jews largely have chosen a path of segregation, and so if that came into support for Trump, although Orthodox Jews still oppose Trump's Muslim ban, that most Orthodox organizations stood up against the Muslim ban, and still have certain, like Nation of Immigrants in America should be considered a nation of immigrants, not necessarily like ethno-nationalist, but also a sense to say that Ashkenazic Jews are European immigrants, that factually maybe darker skinned people, crime, stop and frisk, and to say that European immigrants and that Orthodox Jews should be considered basically a European people. So that if Trump wanted to preserve in fact, like Richard Spencer, Jared Taylor, a lot of the alt-right ethno-nationalists are rather philo-Semitic to Ashkenazic Jews, in that they consider Ashkenazic Jews part of the European fabric, and generally, like I'm a quarter German Jew. My ancestors lived in Germany. Eastern Europe for over 1,000 years, that we were part of uh, Europe. But that fissure with Trump hit the majority Jewish community, to say, like, no, this is, as American Jews, this is not what we stand for. This is not the direction we want America moving. And in fact, like in Michigan, it was Jewish women that were most instrumental in defeating Trump, like the Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, um, and across the nation, there were all sorts of activists that did everything possible to defeat Trump, which was largely on a vision of what does it mean to be an American Jew. And I saw a debate the other day with kind of like a white nationalist versus a Jew, and saying, and the white nationalist was saying he supports Israel, and what's the big problem? You could move to Israel, and the younger American liberal Jews saying, I don't want to move to Israel. So to that extent, um, what is our vision for America? And that's why I say generally multiculturalism. Most Jews, even right-leaning Jews, even Orthodox Jews that supported Trump, have a more um, multicultural take. But then you also have people like Zemmour in France and Stephen Miller, and I think a lot of those people are more secular Jews that are phenotypically quite white, or probably largely European, and have embraced a European Jewish identity, and so are largely xenophobic or racist
Yeah, even
towards darker
Zemmour,
skinned
I'll just
people.
stop right there, Dooovid. Even Zemmour is getting support from, some nationalists that are, you would think would never, ever, ever support a Jewish candidate. I mean, he's really turned a lot of Europeans against Islam. Even those who may have had, positive attitudes toward it. So it's really created quite a schism.
Well, it's the same
Yeah,
thing
no,
with
continue.
Islam, where you say, okay, that Muslims are teaming up with homosexuals, like Abdul Saeed, the mayor of London, are all big protectors of homosexuality, because you need broader coalitions in order to win. And if it's on the left, it's generally the coalition of minorities, Hindus, Jews, Muslims, blacks, gays, various, whatever reason a
Well,
person's a minority. But on the right,
yeah.
you need a coalition to win, and so they might prefer to have ethnically that. But at the end of the day, Ashkenazic Jews um, are a more natural, uh, might, I mean, you could argue it is an argument within people on the right, but saying Zamor's a blue-eyed man. Zamor's ancestors have probably been in Europe over 1,000 years, and so if they want to win, they got to form a coalition with what they have.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, lost in all this is, um, one of the difficulties that the Muslim community has, in my estimation, is that, especially among our leadership that has a lot of, Islamic knowledge, they're able to disseminate this knowledge to the Muslim community, but a lot of it gets lost in translation when you have all of this, like, and some of it really happens. I mean, you have Muslims who are doing bad things. I mean, like in Europe, I mean, especially in the UK, you have the issue of, like, of quote unquote, really grooming gangs, where, you have men from South Asian descent, overwhelmingly men from South Asian descent, who are attacking like these British women, like entering into relationships with underage women, assaulting them. And this has been like sort of like the poster, for like the stirring up nationalist sentiment within Europe and the UK. And what the way the left's take on it is, you know, um, is to engage in whataboutery and say, okay, well, I mean, it's racist to even bringing this up. They're the white British who do that as well. Um, but the fact of the matter remains is getting lost in all this is that people think that this is what Islam actually condones, which is completely false. I mean, even in Dutton's book, and nothing against Dutton. I mean, he's just going with the information that's presented in front of him. I mean, he doesn't have the time to delve deep into like Islamic texts and find the answer to like all these important controversial issues. But a lot of people actually think that, Islam condones, rape and assault and, female genital mutilation. And because the left won't address these hot topics, anger towards Islam just grows. And then whatever right wing media outlets remain, they're not even going to have Muslims on at all. So there's kind of like, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. And I think getting lost in all this is that, people are just really, really ignorant about, what Islam actually teaches. And on top of that, you have we have to be completely honest. There are, some Muslim immigrants in Europe that are doing bad things. And look, they're in a really tough situation. I'm not going to deny that. I mean, a lot of them, they're in life or death situations. Their countries have been ruined. Their economies have been decimated. Like a lot of them just came to Europe because they had no place else to go. But I think by not, like taking these important, difficult topics head on, it's just going to make it worse for them. I mean, anti-Islam sentiment is just going to grow in Europe, and it's just inevitably going to lead to conflict.
Well,
So
similar
yeah,
to you mentioned the Tory cartoon, you say like, okay, like Israel is not representative of Judaism. In fact, it goes against the principles of Judaism. Like, it's a secular state. It forces in many ways, the breaking of the religion. But like, Israel is obviously a Jewish state and a representative of Judaism, even if it's a false representation. And then if you're looking like, obviously, God forbid, the people doing these bad things, saying they're Muslim, they went to mosque, they pray, they do these rituals, they have names like Abdullah and Muhammad, even if it's a false representation of the religion. So like in
well,
America,
just to stop you right there, Dovid, like a lot of these guys are not practicing at all. I mean, like most of the people involved in these crimes are really non-practicing Muslims, or maybe they were complete degenerates, and then they learned about a few things about their religion, and then they became radicalized. So I just wanted to comment on that, though. So,
well, I mean, if they come from other countries that they're culturally Muslim, they have Islamic sounding names. If they went to any place, they went to mosque.
yeah.
Saying that they weren't going to church. I mean, they might have became atheist or degenerate. But I was saying if you had to classify him as something, that Muslim is the most logical classification. And I said, like my father told me when I became, Orthodox Jewish or very, I think it's a very common sentiment in America. Maybe your parents or friends, say it too. Like if Islam makes you a better person, I'm for it. Like I was saying, like multiple truth hypothesis. If Jesus makes you a better person, I'm for it. If Muhammad makes you a better person, I'm for it. If Krishna makes you a better person, I'm for it. And a lot of people in the West have that type attitude. And you could see that, okay, does Islam make you a better person? And relatively in America, despite I mean, Hindus come out somewhat as the model immigrants, but in reality, Muslims are somewhat model immigrants. I mentioned that Abdul Hamoud won the mayor of Dearborn, but the educational, social, economic achievement status of Muslims is extremely high in America, and generally, Muslims in America are law-abiding, even target uh, Republicans, and many times you target the Republicans like family values. I mean, there are cases in Europe might be different. The numbers are
Oh,
quite different.
Europe is
But
way different than
saying
North
that you could
America.
look at like to your parents or your friends, and like if you're in university and you say like no, I mean that they're good people, they're charitable. Here in Metro Detroit, Jews and Muslims get together on Christmas to fulfill voluntary roles. Mostly Muslims. I mean, a handful of Jews, but vast majority Muslims on Christmas to do the various charity tasks like firemen and soup kitchens, so that Christians could be with their family on the holiday. And Muslims are very charitable. Like the Flint water crisis, like doing things for other people. That the general attitude, you judge a person off their actions, and so God forbid terrorism or rape or these crimes are happening and they're put to Muslims, even if they're very loosely connected to Muslim, but that's really the only thing you classify them, versus saying like no, like I didn't expect it. But I've met Muslims, and they're good people, they're charitable, they're nice, they're successful. And I mentioned here in my area, there's the Islamic House of Unity Center in Bloomfield Hills, which is one of the richest suburbs in Metro Detroit. And there's a lot of European converts,
Mm.
and they're engineers and doctors. There's probably 20, medical doctors that go there. And I went there for a few interfaith, and the people they're sending their kids to medical school. They're giving food to soup kitchen. I was driving in my neighborhood, and I saw, God forbid, sometimes you have people that stand on street corners begging by the car sections, and I saw someone slowing down to give food, and I looked. It was a woman with hijab, saying like the Middle East, but this was a Islamic woman hijab, and she was driving, and she was slowing down to give beggar money, and so yeah, there is a steady supply of Western converts in this area, and it's largely due, saying that yes, Islam makes people a better person, and I think your average Westerner, would take that sentiment. If Islam makes you a better person, I'm for it.
Yeah, it's a challenge that we have to deal with. I mean, for us who converted, like our entire family and our community is non-Muslim, so we have no choice but to be on, to be like the best example. I find that not all, but some. I mean, Detroit's a different example. I mean, the Muslim community is very vibrant there, but especially I think. And I think you touched upon this in a previous interview, um, that Europe is a different situation, and that the communities are far more segregated. They're not integrating. They're not they're kind of like the economic underclass. And whereas in North America, there you have an actual ocean to cross over. So like there's the Muslims here, especially in Canada, are more better educated. They're doctors, they're engineers. Um, but the fact still remains is that there's still, going to be this conflict between Islam and the Anglosphere. And I think for the Muslims who don't really want to, I guess they rightly so. I mean, they're afraid they if they don't interact with white people very often, they're just going to get what they think about it from what they think about the Anglosphere from the media or from the terrorist attack that I saw, and that in their mind, they're going to have this heuristic, this like thought process that like the majority of white people think this way.
There's a
That
professor at Wayne State University that I have on my YouTube channel from Interfaith, Said Khan, and he mentioned he grew up in England and came to the U.S. His father was a doctor, but even to the model citizen that he's in London, you said, well, if you become a doctor, what is my kid going to do? So even like Richard Spencer, the anti-immigrant, you're like okay, like, we want merit-based immigrants, but said like no, we don't want any immigrants. We don't want doctors coming over because if they become doctors, that's another white person that is not going to be a doctor. So there's ranging sentiment, although I think that's a vast minority. Like the pure nativism that you don't want people coming and excelling in society, and you'd rather live in a worse conditions among your own is a vast minority. I do argue with some white advocates, call them, that would say yes, they'd rather live in poor, worse conditions and be amongst their own. Although that's definitely the minority, and yeah, so historically with Judaism, you're saying that work. I said this even to local Palestinians, Muslims at Wayne State University. What my ancestors like, these people don't like you. Make yourself useful. Saying that a lot of Muslims in America, Canada probably have that attitude, is saying there's a lot of discrimination. These people don't really want us here. And you have to fight an upward battle by being a model citizen, by being law abiding, and by being successful, by filling an important role for society, like doctors and engineers and lawyers and so on. But at a certain time, once you became power, like Dearborn, uh, probably not Dearborn, like London, maybe in Europe, where you have a large enough population to say like, well, we're tired of trying to be model citizens so we could fit in to your culture that we're never going to fit into, and to to kind of be in your face and say we're going to beat you in your own country, which comes to like the interfaith as the coalitions somewhat against whites, that everyone in the interfaith has to team up, uh, against the larger white community that doesn't want us here, period. And whether that's accurate or not, whether there is a larger white community, and even if it's not active, but just as they, God forbid, like a conspiracy, the Great Replacement. But the polling's pretty clear on demographic changes, that the majority of whites in, even whites an accurate word, in Canada, the U.S., Europe, don't want to become a minority in a place where they were historically the majority, and
Of
look at
course.
that uh, as a bad thing. And God forbid, atheism is probably worse than among European peoples. In Europe and America, the church is on decline. Like Claire Caw in her regular comments, that converts to Islam may not bother the same triggers. So it's a question, if you're advocating to say, like President Biden, that it's really not a big deal. It's a good thing even that whites are going to be a minority in America, or possibly in London there already, or places in Europe, or or um, or you say that no, that you don't have to become a minority in your own country. That's not what we're trying to do. I mean, so these demographic issues are extremely important. I've seen from my arguing with the far right people that immigration, multiculturalism are the main issue. The people that straight up hate, just haters, anti Semites, anti Islamic, are relatively rare. And usually you could win those, the majority of the people over. But people that are concerned about the changing demographic content of their areas is relatively large. And so, as I said, the polling is pretty clear that like
Well,
over half of America is concerned about the changing demographics.
well, I mean, it's inevitable that
When you
that
say it's inevitable, but you say
the
like no,
sentiment. No, no. I mean, the inevitability is that the sentiment is that white people are going to be placed into a corner, and it's not just what they see as changing demographics, but this the idea of this. I mean, it's a
the things
fact. The
that come with
critical.
it is English, people that don't even speak English, or what people used to think was just this is the way we are here. And so like, what are you talking about? Like, even like my parents, like people they've never heard of the cultural, musical, television, or even historic names that, like of people that they thought were important for building society, and just no one's heard of this, no one cares,
Well, I mean,
because the society has changed that much.
the real problem facing the Anglosphere is liberal nihilism. I mean,
Well,
like
atheism. I learned that
atheism.
from
Yeah.
my Hindu friends who's saying atheism is the plague on the West. The biggest problem confronting,
Mm.
the white man is atheism, and the polling is quite clear that atheism is much higher in the West, in America and Europe, than any place else in the globe.
Well, I mean, in high school, I mean, I went to a Catholic grade school in high school, and very few people, believed in the doctrines of Catholicism. You maybe had, four or five people who were in like church, the church clubs. I mean, we still went to church. A lot of us hated it. And not here to denigrate, people from a Christian or Catholic background, but there wasn't the real sense of in Arabic it's called yaqeen. It's like the certainty of your religion, right? Like, and a lot of it was just about getting drunk and having a good time, this hedonistic lifestyle. No one was thinking about who am I going to get, am I going to get married to, like what is my career going to be, am I going to support a family? That sentiment was very, it was just dying out. And looking back, it's just that is not going to sustain any civilization, let alone a sub community.
I love
um,
that movie Malcolm X when I was younger. But I mean, can you say what Elijah Muhammad said to Malcolm X? In the solutions to your problems lies in Islam. And if you're like Claire Caw or something like that, and you're looking at yourself and your average European background person in uh, the West, are you honestly going to say the solution to their problems lies in Islam?
Yeah, it's a tough sell, but even Malcolm X, I mean, again, even nationalists have a lot of respect for Malcolm X, but even, Malcolm X recommended that, white people, if they converted to Islam en masse, it would be great for their society. And, that anti-racist white people should form all white groups, right? Not to be completely cut off from the black Muslims, but they would still work hand in hand. So, like I said, I mean, this, what we see in cities today in metropolitan areas in the West is that, Muslim communities, they're keeping their culture, they're staying, they're creating their own orgs, their own mosques, their own marriage networks, because following their religion, nowadays is difficult enough, but to, to absorb into a totally different culture and a totally different worldview, is an even taller order. So I think, what we're seeing now is that the Anglosphere is, they do see, a lot of the positive benefits in Islam. It's a matter of making it a palatable, and b feasible for them to actually enter into it, and go back to, have this as an option, as a tradition that they can follow. So I mean, and then when we talk about group strategies, I mean, the more that this conflict, continues, where it's, going to be whites versus, minorities, or Republicans versus Democrats, the idea of, a white Muslim sub community in any country in the West, like, the more you follow mainstream media, the more that's going to be less and less appealing to, like, Muslims who don't interact with white people at all. And conversely, with the Anglosphere, they're going to see, okay, if more whites convert to Islam en masse, will that be good for us? Are they going to become treacherous? But the thing is, no one's ever presented this paradox to people like Taylor and Spencer, that the more they're the Anglosphere rejects Islam, as a tradition, the worse it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be worse for the demographic situation, because us European descendant converts, it's going to be difficult for us to, even survive and keep a foothold if our families are going to keep rejecting us. And obviously, when it comes to, deciding who we're going to marry, you know, marrying another convert from a European background as well, you're going to have to deal with two families that hate Muslims, right? So they're going to have no choice but to marry into a born Muslim family. And I don't blame them at all, because, if their family and their community have rejected them, then you're basically left with no choice. And I don't think anyone has ever presented this paradox to them, that, the more that you're rejecting a tradition, not just with Islam, but any tradition, the more you're just going into, the worse it's going to be for your people in the long run.
We have the
Uh,
geographic divide largely of red and blue. So, already in America, every major urban area is less than 50% European background. In places like New York and Los Angeles, Miami are already less than like 25% European background. And like the Virginia elections, that you've had this demographic uh, divide where the urban centers, even like London, maybe in many places in Europe, are already majority multicultural, and it switches to more and more multicultural. And then you have the more rural places that are ethnically homogenous. And a lot of people I speak to, and even myself, I'm thinking like, we're probably going to balkanize. You might think of solutions like a Dubai, like some sort of emirate system. And,
yeah.
so like if you're in Dearborn now, like you're already a multicultural area, people are generally more accepting than saying if you're on the other side of the divide. So if you're talking like does Islam help you succeed and become a better person? Well, it could be if you lived in Metro Detroit, it does. But if you lived in a rural place or a less diverse place, it might not. And conceivably, theoretically, like as a believer in the message, you would say yes, even to a rural person, like I mentioned, the man at the 1893 World Parliament of Religion who converted to Islam without having ever met a Muslim, just based on reading the texts. That you can say that's conceivable, but yeah, I would say like generally it's intermarriage. And I see like Hinduism, a lot of Hinduism people encourage converts to marry people from their own background, or even in Judaism, that there's a lot of encouragement of converts to marry other converts. I'm not sure of the inner workings of Islam, and Islamic law could be different in that matter, where there isn't so much of a pressure for converts to marry other uh, converts like that,
Most of the time yeah, the first I've heard converts back in,
or
from
even
like
even
the
just pressure to say if that
uh
for America that I don't know. I mean, to look like in a racial term, but like it's like a lot of people want to marry a white, so so that there might
yeah.
be you might even like you could be a Joe Schmo convert to Islam and marry a female doctor.
Yeah,
Even though you went to
yeah.
community
And this
college,
is a
but you
complaints
convert
from
to
yeah,
Islam and you could marry
yeah.
a doctor.
And this is a rightful
Or
complaint,
the opposite, like, I mean, it's more the opposite, but you see,
yeah.
wealthy Islamic men that marry kind of, like kind of the American dream. They want to get their blonde, and their blonde, is kind of poor and uneducated, and the husband is, is a doctor, is an engineer, is a wealthy businessman.
It's a sensitive topic, but yeah, in essence, you see that a lot. Usually, it's used as a fix-all for someone who converts to Islam, because again, these Muslim communities, there a lot of the mosques, they're busy enough as it is. They don't have the time, the money, the resources, the wherewithal to take this convert in, as like their new family member, and have a mosque community, fulfill all their needs. So the simplest solution they think of is just to marry them off into to a born Muslim. So but at the same time, again, this is not like, and you probably in the Jewish community you have like the matchmaker system, as opposed to say dating, and in the Muslim community we don't date. And if you're a convert, you want to strictly follow the religion. So you're not dating, so you can't find out about your spouse that way and screen for potential, mismatches. And on top of that, you don't have a Muslim family to look into finding a spouse for you. So that's a very dangerous combination. So a lot of people
Outside
end
of
up marrying.
Orthodoxy, it's usually post, where the person finds a non-Jewish spouse and fall in love or get married, and then the conversion comes after. And so I think in Islamic circles that might also be that someone that the Muslim man becomes kind of secular and marries a Western person, then after the marriage, becomes more religious and converts his wife, as opposed to that it's a post hoc conversion, as
Yeah.
opposed to the woman wanted to be Muslim and sought out a Muslim spouse. I mean, there are some of those. You go in mosque, there are uh, Peter Santinello, actually a big streamer. It was in Dearborn. He was interviewing a Hispanic woman that converted to Islam, and so I mean, they're interesting ethnographic, social phenomenon. And then the
Mhm.
colorism factor is, how big of a factor is colorism in Islam? Do you have benefit in the Islamic community? Like, okay, you're here in the West, and maybe white privilege is a fact, maybe and therefore the Islamic community recognizes that you have the white privilege, and there'll be that colorism factor.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not healthy, I think, for European descendant converts. It places us up on a pedestal. It's created a lot of animosity, between us and the African American Muslim community, and rightly so. I mean, they have every right to be
But here in
resentful
Detroit,
about
like
these
saying
things.
they send you to an interfaith, you're saying like God forbid if the imam goes to interfaith, a lot of people are God forbid going to be Islamophobic, and you think, oh, are you a terrorist? But if they send a European convert, they're not going to. You're very less likely to think that you're the basic racist.
Yeah.
Uh, so a lot of times you find it's in fact factually the European converts that represent Islam at interfaiths, and it's specifically due to racist stereotypes, that the
Yeah.
racist stereotypes generally wouldn't apply to you.
And I'm not denying that. I mean, there's definitely a factor there. It's people just feel comfortable with, familiar with, who they're with. Um,
Language, accent. I mean, it could be smaller subconscious type things, like you
of
speak
course.
English without an accent, or cultural things that you recognize the cultural cues that.
Yeah. Look, I wouldn't be so naive, to go try to give, the first. try to give dawa to like, a black church. I mean, like, again, I mean, I don't mind going as part of a troop of African American Muslims with African American Muslims. But again, people just feel more comfortable through this, and it's just a natural phenomenon. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's unhealthy for those those white converts for the most part, because again, it's almost like they're only searching for PhD candidates. I mean, only the ones who really dive into it, like become an integrated member of the Muslim community. But a lot of them don't last. I mean, they just, like it's just not designed for like, converts and what we're specifically going through. Um, but I do get what you're saying. I mean, there is that factor that like, they want the white convert, who,
Well, the
like even
language,
though
like
he's
Hebrew, like Judaism, also there's a language barrier in, like, Arabic. Hebrew is a tough language to learn, and you can't really convert to Judaism without eventually at least learning how to pray in Hebrew. And it'll be the same thing, with Islam. That long term, if you want to be a successful convert, you're probably going to have to learn at least to pray in Arabic, or to read Arabic, or understand a decent amount of Arabic.
Yeah, it depends how deep you wanna go. I mean, like, all converts know at least a little bit of Arabic. They know how
Have
to
you
say
made
that.
Hajj?
I've been to, Mecca for Umrah, alhamdulillah, I was able to go, but not for Hajj. I went during the off season, but I was able to visit Mecca and, navigate the Kaaba there, so, yeah.
I've prayed. I have actually an Ahmadiyya prayer book that made a transliteration, so it's a pretty good Islamic prayer book. It has English, um, Arabic, and then a transliteration. Then it has like exact details, like when to bow, when, how to put your hands, with pictures and diagrams. So like I've done interfaith, and I've prayed tens of times, and I use this Ahmadiyya uh,
Oh, cool.
prayer book for beginners in order to do it, and like it worked, because it told me exactly when to bow. And even though they weren't necessarily Ahmadiyya friendly place, but I showed it to a few people there, like that's a pretty that's pretty neat prayer book. But I'm not sure, you say like I mean, if you do the prayers, have you mastered the prayers, or do you say the prayers in English, or just parts in Arabic?
No, no, no. I've mastered, the Arabic to the extent that I need to pray. So and most converts will do that. But yeah, there's like there's the Quran is divided into 30 sections. The last section is the smaller chapters, as you read before, and I've memorized probably about maybe half of that. So I can't have a conversation in Arabic. I just know the Quran. I know some phrases here and there. It is a difficult language to learn. The Quran itself, though, is relatively easy. I mean, it's not insurmountable by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but no, I think this has been really fruitful, Dooovid. Did you have any questions for me specifically, or I just maybe I did want to ask you a little bit about um, like let's just see here, like the Jewish community, vis-a-vis the Muslim community. I know that there's been a lot of there's been some anti-Islam sentiment because of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, historically, with Reform Judaism. But do you find that that's, like, that you're making some inroads there, or that, some of that interfaith dialogue has worked, or that maybe some, those who would have been really opposed to Islam, that they softened a bit, or do you think that it's, like just the same thing, like in the past, couple of years?
Well, here in Metro Detroit, there's geographic segregation. So the
Mhm.
Jewish community, um, lives mostly in the Orthodox, in African American area, or in the different suburban areas, and so there's not geographic overlap between the two communities. So there's very little problems. Occasionally there'll be Palestinian or protests, but just to mention quickly, I encourage you to live stream. You got Wesley Curry and M Banker in the chat, if these are friends of yours,
Oh, let me just see here. I'm
on
not
the
too
on
well
the
versed.
YouTube chat.
Yeah, let me go here right now. You can continue talking, Dovid. Go
So
ahead.
when I was in New York, um, the overlap of the Hasidic community and the various Muslim communities is we're neighbors. That like Church Avenue, One of the biggest Arab sections is right next to the Hasidic section, but there's very little conflict. Like almost no violence among Muslims and Jews, compared to between maybe African Americans and Jews. And usually you have, as say, you have representatives of the community that do things like that. And if there was conflict, that the community leaders would squash the conflict very quickly and would get together and make sure that they understood that the conflict is not in either party's interest. Both parties are here in America trying to succeed, but they're largely segregated. And also,
Mm.
there's a lot of business. So, like the famous B&H, not B&H, the name slipping me, the suit store has a lot of Muslim employers, and the a Hasidic owner allows them to pray daily, to take a break and pray in the office, and so there's somewhat a lot of mutual respect. So I would say, uh, despite occasional when there's a flare up between Israel and Palestine, like in New York, you saw the most recent. There'll be protests or related to the Palestinian um, Israel conflict, but there's very little conflict in Metro Detroit between Arabs, Muslims, and Jews. And in New York, there's relatively very little conflict. In Europe, that's not the case. There's a substantial amount of anti-Semitism coming, similar to, like you said, the grooming gangs, not necessarily from devout Muslims, but more from people who are refugees or people that come from Muslim nations but aren't really Muslim, but they might have names like Muhammad and Abdul, or come from what we'll call secular Muslim families. So in Europe, that is quite an issue of Muslim on Jewish violence, but
Oh, really?
I think it's more ethnic, saying that they might call it Muslim, but they're really, it's Moroccan or Afghani refugees, or so, that it's not really coordinated Muslim violence. I've spoken to this guy Joseph Cohn in London who advocates, and it's usually tied up to when there's conflict or war between Israel and Palestine. But here in Detroit, I can't think of a single case that I've heard of Jews and Muslims involved in violence, or like an Orthodox Jew getting beat up by an Arab or a Muslim. Occasionally, there's protests, like there's BDS, and there's various issues related to Palestine. Um, and even in New York, it's said, and we don't live in proximity. In
Mm.
Detroit, the Muslim community lives a good 10, 15 minute drive away from the Jewish community.
Mm.
And so in New York City, where we do live literally overlapping neighborhoods, there's almost no violent conflict. And, so I would say that's generally not a problem. In Europe, I think it's similar to African American violence against Jews, where it's probably more crime related, and God forbid, just if God forbid, most of the Jews who get beat up by blacks, and for whatever demographic reasons or cultural reasons, maybe Jews are getting beat up because we're Jewish by blacks. But if you look at regular violence or crime rates,
Mm.
it could just be that we live in proximity to blacks and end up um, you know suffering violence. So my guess in Europe is it's partially that
Yeah.
Jews live in proximity, and unlike in America, where Muslims are relatively law-abiding, upper middle class, social economic.
Hmm.
In Europe, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So there might be a stronger level of violence from, if you call them, it might not even be accurate to call them Muslims, or you say
No,
immigrants
a lot
from
of them are
Muslim
non-Muslim at all.
nations. So
Yeah.
if you come from Syria, you're basically Muslim, even if you're not Muslim. If you
Yeah.
come from Morocco, so to say, like if you're a Moroccan immigrant in Germany, or Syrian, and they beat up a Jew, you say, okay, that's a Muslim beating up a Jew. May or may not be an accurate way, but usually it'd be portrayed. And then also the conflict with Israel and Palestine and Syria, that the ongoing war situation, where they could look at kind of like bringing the battle field to Europe. But in the U.S., no, I don't think
No.
it did happen a few months ago where when Israel was bombing Gaza, that there was a handful of violence against Jews, like tens of cases of mostly Palestinians beating up Jews. But even that was limited and relatively minor. And it said, like, God forbid, just due to the general crime or situation in America, 90% of the time, if a Jew gets beat up, we're getting beat up by a black. I
Okay.
mean,
Well,
sometimes they're Muslim even, but it's saying even we're more likely to get beat up. Even, like, people are really scared of Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. However, there's been more Israelite, black, so to say, Jews beating up Orthodox Jews than Nation of Islam. There's almost no violence, even with all this fear over Nation of Islam, or Louis Farrakhan is constantly saying anti-Semitic things. That I've not heard of a single case of a Nation of Islam member beating up a Jew in America.
yeah, I mean, people are going to say what they say. I mean, I know you're a free speech advocate. I mean, and I don't condone, what some things people are saying, but I mean, it's just they're. I mean, it doesn't equate that you're going to end up, hurting somebody. I mean, yeah, I mean, skirmishes are going to happen. It's inevitable when you have, United States is a country of what, 350 million people. I mean, it's inevitable that there's going to be, violence and conflict, and the media, whether that's on like the liberal left or whatever right wing outlets remain, are going to use those instances to weaponize it and instrumentalize it for their own political agendas. But I would say that what's happening in Europe. I mean, we as Muslims shouldn't stand for it. I mean, Allah says stand up for justice even if it's against your own selves. And if Muslims are doing bad things, if they're assaulting people, if they're raping people, or any people, really.
Well, I'm going to say my
I,
point that of the larger, like all Afghani, Syrian, Moroccan,
mhm,
Libyan refugees are basically Muslim. So you say, like, just because they're Muslim countries, and if you come from no matter how religious you are,
mhm,
if you're a Syrian, Moroccan, or so on in Europe, you're basically a Muslim, so if you're looking at, you don't really consider
yeah,
those people Islamic, but from a certain respect that those are largely Islamic dominated nations. So all the people coming from those countries in Europe are grouped together as Muslims, even if they never go to mosque.
right,
And it's related to things like names, saying
mhm,
that names and language and culture, and also like the bringing the war home. That if you're in, Israel's bombing Syria, for certain reasons, or Iran. So if you're a Syrian refugee in in Europe, you might have biases. You might have been taught to hate Jews in Israel, and it may not come from Islamicism. It's more
mhm.
cultural. But if you're in Europe and you're a Jew in Europe, you're just like, well, aren't all Syrian refugees Muslim?
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to make that kind of blanket statement. But in any case, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the stream tonight, Dovid. Did you have any questions specifically for me? My background.
Were you able to? So you are married. You said your wife is from Dearborn. Family's from Dearborn, or was your mother?
My mother's family is from Dearborn. Yeah, my dad's French Canadian. Yeah, I
Did
am
that have
married.
something to do
Yeah.
with your conversion or being exposed to Islam, being in proximity?
Not at all, actually. Completely unrelated. Yeah. So. No, I learned about Islam on my own. I was 22 years old, and I grew up in Canada, and like a small town called Amherstburg, just outside of Windsor. So we would visit my mother's family in Dearborn every once in a while, but we never lived in the states.
But you were able to. Did you end up marrying a Middle Eastern woman?
I was previously married to convert women, and that those didn't work out. So like I am married now to a Syrian. So she's of Syrian descent, but she's a Canadian citizen. So she's not a refugee, but she's been in North America for a very long time. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I love these conversations, just understanding people. And I like most like anybody from any, that picked up and changed their way of life. It's very usually enlightening to understand. And I encourage these conversations. I appreciate you reaching out. I know you mentioned you planned on making a video about Edward Dutton Islam as a group strategy. I look forward to watching that. And if you have other people that see this video and want to continue the conversation,
Mhm.
I like doing this. I think it's important. And as I said, like my father, he quoted it in movies. It's in a lot of movies, but he said when I became an Orthodox Jew that if Orthodox Judaism, and my father's not Jewish, makes you a better person, I'm for it. And I think that's a pretty common attitude, and that's usually my approach towards interfaith. Religion is meant to make people better people, and but it's important, the group strategy. So it's interesting discussing that in that dynamic, and just saying like that how do you make sense of this group strategy and separate that, and I deal that with, so to say, as a non-Zionistic Jew, that Zionism is generally the overall group strategy of Jews, even more so than our own religion. And so it leaves in that dilemma of me, so to say, being a God-fearing person that wants to do what the books say and what's right with what I think God's eye, versus being part of a people, and when the overall strategy of the people might not be the same as my understanding of the religion. So I find this conversation important. I'm glad you reached out, and I'm happy to do it again. You
Yeah,
have
no,
my
no,
contact information.
absolutely, Dovid. No, I think you're a really fascinating character, and what I like about your your thought processes, and how you look at things, is that it's not like uh, it's like you're your own independent thinker, and you don't let like it's not like one side or the other. Nothing's black and white, and
I studied
like
physics. I love to just understand and figure things out, like
yeah.
the multi-truth hypothesis, and kind of just like a childhood fascination of trying to figure things out. And I think that's probably maybe how you look at Islam. I'm trying to understand the great mysteries. Like there's
Hmm.
a lot of issues we have to work through, a lot of societal problems, but really the main thing that's going through my head is trying to like unravel and understand these great mysteries.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time to come to these conclusions, probably like 13, 14 years after I converted. I mean, I think the big light bulb in my head moment was when I was doing an open house at a mosque. I was volunteering. I was paired up with a Pakistani girl, and this older white gentleman came in, and we started showing him like the different panels and things about Islam and stuff like that. And he asked a question like like how do people get married in Islam? And then the girl was like, oh, our families will reach out to other families, and then they'll screen for this this potential spouse, and say are they compatible, not compatible, the families will meet, and from that process we'll get married. And then he said, that's interesting. And then he looked at me and he says, well, what do you guys do? And then I didn't have an answer for him. And I mean, it was just that one of those moments where it was just like I had to think through, like, okay, what is this, and I see converts go in and out like a revolving door, and over time I've said, okay, yeah, I mean, this kind of idea, it's a win-win. I mean, you talk about group strategies. This would be a group strategy that would be in everybody's favor. I mean, but like inshallah, it'll continue to get stronger and stronger. But I really appreciate the time, Dovid. Did you want to plug your channel or
Yeah, I'm Dooooovid. So I'm David Kelton, but because I argue with a lot of counter Semites, sometimes it's safer to just go by Dooooovid, because God forbid, want to, and even my family are involved, my family, and that. So, but yeah, I'm on Facebook, Twitter. If people like Interfaith or want to see in Detroit, I have years of Interfaith, and on Facebook also pictures a lot of these places of worship. COVID-19, I'd like to get back to IRL, uh, interfaith, and but in the meantime, I love these conversations. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation, ask, you just find me on YouTube, Twitter, and any of my social media. And God bless. I enjoyed the conversation. Reach out anytime.
all right, wonderful. And I'm Rob from Islam for Europeans. Please subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Okay, and end stream. I don't know if this is gonna, if we're gonna just after I click this button, if we're gonna be completely gone, Dooooovid, but let me try it. If I disappear, I wish you the absolute best, but let's see if it just stops it or if it just ends the window.
Usually it leaves you on. So if you once you end the stream, that we're still in the video call and could talk to each other.
Let's see.
I think you had subscriber only in the chat, so only people who are subbed to your channel were able to chat. So you might want to change those settings. And it's good to get good with the technology. You find actually a lot of the names of the bigger streamers are guys who are good with tech because it's related. And I've actually spent a lot of time walking people through how to do this because I like these conversations so much that I've explained to people how to use these programs. And I use StreamYards, but Restream is basically the same thing. It lets you do it for free, but plants the name there.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you for the help with the tech. Next time, it'll be a lot better.
You might still be live. Well, I can't tell.
Oh, let's just shut that off. Let me just click OK. If I